Hello! Welcome to another new stream. Today I have Alexander Asmus. He has been on the stream before, but we're going to talk about weapon creation, how that works, and why, and how, and what it looks like. And we're also might be teasing something new, at least, a little hint or like a little show of something that's to come in Hunt. So I hope everyone is doing great. The reason we were doing a weapon stream today is because on social media we asked what kind of streams you guys want. So obviously we're also going to show off the new map once we have that stuff ready for you guys. But weapons was one of the requests as well, like the whole process and the whole pipeline. So we're doing that today, and yeah.
Okay, hello guys.
Get us started.
Yeah, then we might just dive into it. So at very first I would like to talk about our recent edition, which is the Nagant carbine that you can also already play. And when talking about that, I would like to basically point out how we have our weapon modification system, where we basically are able to provide all these variants from a single weapon, like the Nagant revolver. Mm-hmm. As you all know, when we first started with the game, we only had the Nagant revolver ready. And over time, we basically added the Nagant silencer, and then we had the Nagant Deadeye, where we added the scopes. And just recently, we added the Nagant Officer, which is a double action revolver, giving you more firepower, or basically more rate of fire, actually. One of the changes that we just did was that the Nagant Brawler that was in the game for ages, actually, now switched to the Nagant Officer, for a specific reason, being that we want each weapon having some unlocks, or basically like being able to be crafted into a certain way. So for example, if you at one point when the crafting system goes live, you acquire the officer, the Nagant Officer, you have the choice to go either down the road of bringing it to the Brawler version with the dusters on it, or you go the path down and making it this like carbine rifle kind of thing.
So a question that we get quite a lot for people is like, oh, but they're technically the same weapon. How do each weapon, feels like their own, and like how do you make sure that it has their unique features, and like how do you change it to make it its own weapon?
So in general, we of course have to think about to be efficient with our time. So basically doing variations of existing weapons is of course really time efficient. So that brings minor changes to the game. Like for example, on the Nagant Officer, it's obvious, we kind of use the same model. It's a different skin for the weapon, so to say. But the way it plays with the double action is different. So the rate of fire that you have in the game is really much higher. So you will be able to kind of compete more, for example, with other fast firing revolvers a bit more, I guess. And yeah, of course, with basically, we could do this in adding a complete new double action revolver, but that would make much more work for us. So we kind of have to be, clever with the time, where we put our time, because it's not just doing the model, it's also doing animations. So for example, a complete new revolver needs new reload animations, things like that. And so basically we try just to be time efficient there.
And I assume it's also because like a lot of people are like, oh, why are there a lot of weapons coming out comparing to, for example, a new boss or a new map? But like this obviously gives us the chance to make a weapon a bit more easier than creating something from scratch or something big, and it's different people working on it.
And especially also what we're also trying to do is we have the crafting system being inbound, so to say, and we'll hit the test service soon. And we also need, like, of course, variations that go into the crafting system. So if we, for example, have a revolver that only comes with, I don't know, one variation, then there's not much depth for this, like, crafting tree, for example, to traverse. Yeah. So, and for the next slide here, you can actually see how we split our weapons apart to make this variation possible. So we split apart the barrel. Can they actually see my mouse cursor? Yeah, they can.
Yeah.
Ah, cool. So basically we have the barrels here, and we have the receiver. That's basically the main part of a weapon. These parts are, for example, animated, while the barrel is usually like a static mesh. This receiver part has animations going on. The animators animate the drum, animate the trigger, animate the hammer, for example. And we have stock meshes separately that can be attached. And we have an attachment system for the scope, for example. And if we wanted to, and that gives us also some possibility for balancing the game, we could say, okay, we need maybe a silent. I mean, we don't plan this, right? That's basically a bit
dull silencer. Yeah. I want a dull silencer.
Yeah. We could basically make a scoped, silenced, I don't know, brawler version of this gun with a long barrel. I don't know. That would be probably a bit over the top and would kind of break the weapon cast a bit. But yeah, there's a lot of flexibility going on with this system for us. Yeah. So, and yeah, usually when it comes down to how we come up with those things, it's our game designers. They have like huge lists of weapons, like historical real-life weapons, but also like fictional weapons that they think would fit our narrative, would fit our like timeline, yeah, you name it. And
period.
Yeah, and also the supernatural aspect that the game has.
Yeah.
And when we go for a fictional weapon, for example, like for example the carbine version that we just talked about, over here on the left side we see concept art provided by our nice concept art team. The left one here, by the way, was done by Ivonise. And here we have different versions of the carbine, just like explorations, how it could look. We decided to go for the first one. So there are some similarities for the barrel. We decided to make the barrel even longer, so the aspect of turning it into a rifle is even more pronounced. But for example, we decided to not go with that stock because we already had a butt stock for this gun. And there comes again the aspect of time efficiency.
Being able to reuse that.
Not doing a new one, new animations, new poses, but basically reusing what we have, because that of course frees up time so that we can at one point maybe create a completely new weapon.
So the way that, because I'm just looking at images, like the middle one, for example, seems like a skeleton rather than the actual concept art. How does that translate? It's just for the shape of like the front of it, for example, with like this being like wider than this being narrow, or
no? I think the Evo just explored some ideas. So basically, when we will see later, basically that we explored these ideas of, for example, having really like bare bones frame shaped stocks, for example. And here basically he followed the same aspect. It's just of adding visual variety, visual difference. But for example, why we didn't decide on this design is that this is really thin, really kind of flimsy. It is cool from up close, but basically when you look at this, when you look at the weapon from a distance, you will barely notice any changes here. So we wanted to have something that has more material variation going on, and that is a bit more thicker, for example. Yeah, and yeah, with the stock again, that only comes down to just reusing animations, for example, that we have.
Makes sense.
On the right side, there we have fictional weapons for the most part. So on the far right, we have the sticky bomb, which you already know. This concept is done by Peter Sutherland. Also pretty cool. The model in the final game is a bit different. It's a bit smaller. These are changes that are coming over time when we basically experiment with early prototype models.
Because how long is usually the average time for like prototyping and coming up with the concept of it?
And that's really that comes down also to the complexity. So, for example, for something like the sticky bomb, that is, I mean, it's not that it's such a complex weapon in general, but it's an interesting weapon, and the model depicted here is complex in terms of how do you unfold the spikes, for example? How is the character handling the item in first person? And for this weapon, we coming up with a prototype model. I will explain in a second what a prototype model is. That was in our build in our game in the prototype stage for quite some time. So people had much time to play with this weapon. We could test it out, and only when we were really happy and were also like sold on the idea on having sticky bombs, we basically went a step forward and brought it to the quality level that you actually see right now in the game. The other concepts here, these are the poison bomb, for example. It's also already in the game.
Yeah.
So these are like, this is a nice difference here. So one, we have a 2D concept that's like just photo bashed, for example, from our concept artist. This is the 3D model provided by concept art. And so for example, when we get a 3D model from concept artists, we can already use that model and put it into the game and experiment. So that speeds up the whole process of creating fictional equipment.
What makes the decision to make a 2D concept art or 3D? Is it just like whenever they feel that this is really what it could be, like more finalized idea, that they make it in 3D?
Yeah, it also comes down to the preferred way of working for the concept artist. So for example, this concept here is done by Ivan Tsansuria, and he is really knowledgeable and really efficient with 3D Studio Max. So he's really fast. And the cool thing, if, for example, a concept artist is doing a 3D model, is that he can solve many things, like the mechanics, like how that things don't intersect, even how the model reads from different angles. That's something that is much harder with a 2D concept, like here, where basically when the model is translated into 3D, suddenly certain shapes don't read that well, so you have to adjust. Yeah, I think that should give an overview where we basically start. So when we get, so that's for fictional equipment. And we also have, of course, the historic guns, like the Nagant revolver. So here I gathered some reference. I have to excuse myself for this like really like bit blurry and grainy
I
reference.
think it's a pretty good picture. I don't know how old the weapon is. Like, people don't use it anymore, I suppose.
It was even used in Second World War. So
but like now.
Now,
yeah. Second World War. Their cameras were pretty bad back in the day. Like,
that's true. Yeah, it's still fired. So I think I think it's not produced anymore. But there are of course still people they are firing it. So fun fact about this weapon: that's one of the only revolvers in the world that you can silence. So we didn't make this up.
Okay.
Reason for this is usually. Between the cylinder and the barrel, there's usually always a little gap. So basically the bullet is in here, and when it's fired, the bullet traverses into the barrel and is fired out there. And so like the explosive gas is usually like, I wanted to point out the screen, which nobody can see. So basically the gas is basically, some of the gas is going out here, where the cylinder meets the barrel. And that of course creates the sound, right?
Yeah.
But here, when you fire this gun, this cylinder is interlocking to the barrel, like really tight. And that basically makes it possible that all the gas is only ejected to the front. So if you put a silencer here, then you basically can suppress the gunshot a bit. Okay. So for historical weapons, we tend to collect much more than this. This is just an example. We go to gun auction sites, for example, where we have like high quality imagery, where also we can make sure that the depicted gun is also like accurate and authentic. So because we don't want to base our reference on replicas, for example, because...
Do we buy guns sometimes to have it in the studio in real life?
We have a few replicas, of course. So don't be afraid to visit our office. We don't have real guns here. But yeah, we have replicas that you can buy and use them as reference, especially for our animators, because it really helps to wield a weapon in your hand when you basically...
And have a feel,
Yeah, because like they have quite some weight to them if you're not used to wielding them. Yeah, and from this like reference, we basically then start to do a prototype model, as I mentioned before. And I just wanted to jump into our main 3D application where we build our models and our weapons. So let me just quickly open this up. We jump directly to the Nagant. So this is 3D Studio Max. A few of you have probably know this, or maybe not. I don't know. But basically, that's one of the industry-leading 3D applications where you can create 3D models, you can render things, you can do basically all kinds of things. So that's a huge application, and that's our main production tool.
Okay,
and it takes time to load.
Advertisement alert.
Continue on messages.
We're getting there. Dun, 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 dun. Just have some elevator music.
Yeah.
Well, someone asked, well, I'll just see that question here. Will community content be possible at least at late points? As in, like, modding, I don't think anytime soon. Like, maybe in the far future when the game is fully released. Like, it would be cool to have mods, but...
I think we would have to put quite some effort into to giving you guys the proper tools at hand to create something that is in line with the vision of our game. Because what we... Of course, when you do community stuff, we want to experience this community content by all. But what we probably don't want is, I don't know, pink weapons or something.
Yeah.
I think that would break our immersion.
Like,
So,
I mean, that's
authoring
the
the
thing what they do
content...
with modding everything anyways. Like, you have anime characters or, like, Donald Trump running around on Showdown.
So yeah, moderating this content is quite some effort, and then basically giving out frameworks in which to work will also require some effort on our end. And yeah, I think that's something that we can think about when we have reached version 1.0. But having, for example, skins, like, remember back in the days, Counter-Strike just creating weapon skins, for example, that are also like kind of moderated to fit into our game.
Yeah.
Maybe, who knows? Okay, so here we are. This is the Nagant revolver in its prototype model stage. So I might just show this in wireframe. So here you can see the polygons this model is consisting of.
But Alexander, what are polygons?
So, oh yeah, let's see
the
terms. Yeah. So a polygon is basically, in 3D artist terms, it's just such a face. It's a planar face. It can be like a triangle shaped, something like just this here. Clicking. Okay. Something like this, but it can be like a multi-gonal face, so to say. And these faces attached to each other basically build the outer shell of our model. Yeah. And in this like really early prototype model, we focus on the rough shapes. So what you can see here is the gun looks quite accurate already, but what we are missing compared to our reference here is we don't have screws, usually. And we don't have like those little tiny details that you can see here, like the patterns and stuff.
That's a plastic one, right? Or is it
this
not?
here? No, this is a real one.
Really? It looks so plastic.
Yeah, it's probably like finished wood or something. So
because
like,
I thought
really
that
glossy.
one was like, obviously you can see that it's like metal or like, you know, like.
Yeah, here.
But that one looks kind of like
plastic.
Yeah,
this is. I think this comes from age, just basically. So like this has a gun finish, like this black aspect.
I like the other one more. It just feels more, you know.
I mean, usually like our guns are more on this side,
exactly.
right? So this is like kind of like more brand new. Yeah, and so we are not focusing on those little tiny details, but getting the right shapes here. We're checking is the iron sight working properly. We're also checking, okay, can this gun even be reloaded? So we can, in this 3D application, even move certain parts around. We have the ammunition here, which we can move into place and check, for example, if it works. These aspects we plan ahead, and these models also get exported into the engine. So then the animators can create first pass animations, check if the model is big enough, if it's small enough. Can the player hands even interact with this, for example, very important part, because of course this is like really tiny compared to the player hands, and we need to make sure that this all this works.
And it doesn't.
And we also take care of already planning ahead the modifications and the splitting apart the weapon.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's always by those parts, the one that we displayed before as well.
Yeah, exactly. So not always, because like sometimes like in this stage here, when I modeled the gun at this stage, I was having this part here separately. So because I thought that might be a good idea to have the stock separate. Later I decided to not do that, because that would actually be not as accurate, because the original gun basically has the stock and this frame in one part.
Oh, okay,
so I decided it's okay to keep those things together, especially as I knew that when we add the stock, which I can show in a second. Wait, we have, so basically here are like, this is the outliner, which is called, or the scene explorer. Like we have in the scene much more than only this model. And I just try to find
so
what
like
I'm...
all the models are there, but
Yeah,
we have
so like here,
on it,
this is for example the prototype model for our stock. And you can, it was planned to just attach it here. Also, another fun fact, this stock is not just a weird looking stock, but it can actually serve as a holster for this gun. So there were quite many weapons back then in the 1980s. The Dolch pistol that we have as well, where basically the stock, the butt stock, could serve as a holster for the gun.
I like how someone says this is really cool. I love how the ammo extends beyond the edge of the revolving cylinder, just like the real Nagant 1895 pistol ammo. It's the longer ammo that helps with the gas stealing mechanism. Interesting.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And we tried to, of course, bring down those details because, like, we could basically cut corners in this stage and not model this as accurate. But we always think like we want to show the different firing mechanisms, the different aspects that make these guns unique, and so we spent some extra time on getting things right. And in this stage, we also explore different ideas. So we have this precision stock that we decided on to have in the end, but we also had certain stock ideas that we explored. And here we come to those wire-shaped butt stocks that we experimented with. So this is how it looked. These were like early designs that I just prototyped. But we decided against this.
Yeah.
This was even designed in order to kind of be foldable.
Yeah, I had to feel like it looked like someone's
like something like this. But that's like basically just like...
Do you want to easily store your Nagant?
Yeah, right.
You can now place it on your table.
And but we decided, okay, this might be a bit weird. So we didn't like follow that approach. But that always comes down to just trying things and then deciding maybe not.
It reminds me of like barbecue tools. So you have like the spattle and like everything else to like turn your burgers, and and then there's just one gun hanging like.
What else? Oh yeah, silencer ideas. We also explored them. We need a stock. Sorry. Yeah. So here are, for example, different silencer ideas that we also experimented with. And this above here, that's the original size of the Nagant silencer. But we also thought that this is like a bit too thin, too flimsy, and a bit too long stretched. So we wanted to have something that looks more makeshift. And we ended up with a construction that uses some linen and a metal frame to basically disperse the explosive gas when it exits the barrel. And we still weren't not happy with it. And then we asked our concept artist to come up with something different. And that's basically where we got the concept here in the upper right from. So that's again a concept from Ivan Sansuria, where he basically used the design of a bottle, of a tin can that served as a silencer. And as you all know, in the end, we ended up with this kind of design, which is still looks a bit different, but that also always comes down to adjusting shapes to work perfectly in 3D and within the game. Oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Can I get a sound for the crossplot?
Yeah, so this is the prototype model, and once we're done with the prototype model and everything is proven and we know what we want to do, then we basically start with the high poly. And the high poly is basically a model that is much more detailed. That has most of the details there. Need the barrel. The barrel is here. And this is, for example, the high poly of the Nagant revolver. And I just like enable the wireframe, which I don't know. Yeah, they can see it. So now we can see like this is much more detailed than the other model. All the shapes are smooth, round. We have the little bolts. We have the little screws there. We have details that weren't even present in the first step. And yeah. With this model, we are able. This takes quite some time to basically to get to such a level of detail, because this shading needs to be perfect in order to translate well into the game engine. This whole model now has 1.5 million polygons. So when we talked about the prototype model, it had, I think, maybe 3,000 polygons, and now we have 2.5 million. We of course need to get this poly count that's far too high to get it into a real-time game engine, because of course each of these little faces here takes up some computation time when you render this, and we can't only render weapons in our engine. We have vegetation, we have the environment, we have characters. So every aspect of our game has a certain amount of render time, and we actually can't get over this render time. Otherwise, the frame rate drops, and of course, performance is a really important thing for us. We always try to be efficient with that.
How long did that model take to create to its current form? Also, I have some questions like saved for later, so don't worry, we'll do the proper Q&A at the end, but I'll ask some questions from the chat right now, and the others I have written down so we can look at them later.
So that model took a week to get to that state from the original prototype state. So this prototype model roughly took me 2 days to get it done accurately. And depending on the amount of fixes and adjustments that I have to make during the stage of creating this nicely high polish and nicely shaded model, the timing can differ. But in this case, it's roughly a week, maybe a day more or something. And yeah, from there, we basically move on and create the low poly model. So I can get this to show as well. So here we have the low poly model. Oh wait, these are far too many.
What happens when you're loading it?
Okay, so this has some like really blurry texture assigned to it for reasons. So this is our low poly model. So that is the model that you will actually see in game. It is not shaded nicely here because the shaders in 3D Studio Max don't support we don't have the right shader here to show this in all detail, but I will show in a minute. So if we now go back to the wireframe mode that we had, so now suddenly we have some kind of in-between thing. So it's far less polygons than, of course, in the high poly, but it's also more polygons than in this prototype stage. And what you will notice is that in the iron sight area up here, we have more polygons than, for example, in low priority areas like down here, where, for example, the hand is covering the stock, right? Yeah. This is not as important. So we try to put the detail where the player actually looks at the most. Yeah. Again, we have this these split up parts. These are the brawler attachment. And what we also do, and this is also interesting, is level of detail. So this model is not only used for first person when the hunter holds this weapon in his hand. It's also used for third person. But of course, this whole weapon. Let me quickly get this away and the stock away. Yeah. Okay. So this weapon now has roughly 10,000 polygons. And this is too much, for example, when you meet another hunter in the game over a distance of maybe 30 meters or 40 meters, these 10,000 polygons are far too much because it adds up. And therefore, we have level of detail meshes also ready. And these are looking like this. Let me just they are black right now, but it doesn't matter. So I can just spread them out a bit so you can see how they look. So we have this.
So I just see a question from American Pool Guy. We just actually answered the question. So he asked, when visually designing the weapons for Hunt, were you able to actually hold and fire the real-world firearms or references, or was it most of the design involving photos? So not photos. You guys haven't been actually shooting with. Have you actually guys been shooting with some weapons?
No.
Like
so
never at like a range.
No. We wanted to, but it never happened, unfortunately, because like it's really not that easy to first find a shooting range in Germany, of course, as you might know. Weapons are not as a big thing as in America, for example.
Yeah.
So even finding shooting ranges that provide you with, for example, historical weapons to shoot is much harder.
Yeah.
And of course, then it comes down to having the time to do that, and also, it requires quite some organization. Would be cool to do, but we haven't, unfortunately. Would be cool though.
Okay.
So
but
to answer the question explicitly, we don't have any shooting experience in our team, but we basically look at videos, for example, also like the channel Forgotten Weapons, for example, many of them might know it. There we basically take a look at how the guns are assembled and disassembled. We research the historical facts about a weapon, and we also take a general look into YouTube videos where these guns are fired in shooting ranges to get a feel for them, like how people wielded these guns, and also like how they sound, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we do have prototypes of weapons, so you still, they can still feel like how heavy they are and such like that.
Yeah, and these are, just to get this point covered, these are the level of detail models that we have. So this is not the first person detail, but this is the detail that would swap in at the distance of maybe half a meter already. So this would be the model and detail that you see at your partner hunter that is really close to you. And the further away you would look at a weapon, the less polygons, for example, you would have on a weapon. So this only has 3,800 triangles, while this here had 4,200. And then we go down drastically to 1,000, and here in the end we only have 400 triangles, which looks really odd and really weird, but it doesn't have to look any better, because that would be a model that you see at a distance of maybe 50 or 70 meters, where you only need to see some kind of silhouette and a like rough shape in the hand of another hunter. Yeah. For such a low poly, of course, we have to get textures on such a low poly, because in order to create these textures, I don't know, maybe that's too complicated to cover this now, but maybe I can try. And you have to tell me if it's getting too technical.
I mean, so far I'm following it. I mean, it did help that I had to do some 3D modeling for university. So.
All right. So basically, what we also have to do when we have created this model now, we also have to create a UV set, or UV set, and wait, this was wrong. Oh, open UV editor.
What guns? This is the Nagant.
This is the Nagant, yeah.
The 1895.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm writing some questions down, so I'll ask them later. I have yours already, Deadly Spider. Okay,
here we go. So this is the unwrap that we have to create for this weapon. And you have to imagine, you can maybe enlarge this a tiny bit, because that is actually also an important step in the workflow. So this looks really like some kind of like cut pattern for, I don't know, like as if you were creating some kind of like suit or something, or a t-shirt. So basically you have to imagine this thing as you take each face and each surface of the weapon and unfold it as if you would basically a cardboard box or something, right? Yeah. Imagine you would have to cut a cardboard box open so you can lay it flat on the ground. And that's what we're doing here. So everything is laid out nicely. So we can, because the challenge is we have to apply a 2D texture to a 3D model.
Yeah.
And this is an important step. And what we try to, of course, avoid is having too much empty space between these shapes, between these shells. And once we have done this process of creating the UV set, and the UV layout, we can then jump into the texturing process. And I can continue with this then here. So here we basically just get a little overview again. Prototype mesh, wireframe, high poly. And here we have then the final model with the textures applied, with the mud applied to our weapon. And that's how you basically see it in the game. Yeah. Then for talking more about texturing, and also the quality of texturing, I would now jump to the Mosin Nagant rifle, where we basically have something prepared for...
I see your bottom favorite weapon, right?
The aftermath, yeah. So here again, we have different variations of the Mosin Nagant. We have a bayonet variation, we have a sniper variation. And also, we're a little bit teasing here. Here is the Mosin Nagant Obres mace variant, which is a really like simple and minor variant, of course. So basically what we did with this model here, and that is to be added to the game soon. It basically adds a kind of mace, blunt mace melee weapon to the stock of the gun, so that your melee attack gets more damage, and you basically can deal blunt damage to certain enemies. And as we know, certain enemies are vulnerable to blunt damage, like the armored, I think.
Yeah.
Is really vulnerable to this. Yeah. So that's a minor addition to the game. And at the bottom, we have the Mosin Nagant Aftermath. So when we started when we basically planned for our early access release, we knew we had a certain amount of weapons that we need to have into the game. And back then, it was not only me, but basically we planned for having one weapon artist having to deliver all the weapons. In the meantime, we get a second one, but still we knew getting all the weapons to our final desired quality would be really hard for us.
Yeah.
So we decided to have some kind of intermediate stage where we would not do this high poly process that I explained with all the nice shading, but basically just use this prototype model and then get and texture this and get this into the game and try to get 80% or maybe 60% of the quality already done. So with that approach, we could make sure that all the weapons that you were able to play in the early access stage when we released were there and were textured, for example. And the Mosin Nagant rifle is a good example for this. So at the top here, we see the Mosin Nagant representative model. Looks quite similar to the lower one, which is the final model. But there are some differences. And one difference, for example, is that we changed, that we had to change the bolt action lever. The bolt action lever, for example, is here bended down, while on the old representative model it was straight. And back then, when we created this prototype mesh, we weren't aware, okay, which kind of scope we wanted to add to the weapon, and how will the scope be positioned even. So that was something we planned in between. So we had the scopes already kind of released when we started planning reworking and finalizing this weapon. And therefore we knew, okay, we need this bolt handle to be changed. There are different versions of the Mosin Nagant out there, and some have bolt handles bent down, some have straight bolt handles, and we then just changed it. And now, for example, this is really important so that, for example, when you perform the bolt action, the scope is not basically intersected or basically it's not interfering with the intersection. And on the next slide, we can actually see where the differences are in the quality of these weapons. So if you take a close look here, can we even zoom in? Oh, we can zoom in.
Oh my God,
wow.
The future.
We have the technology. So if you zoom in, you can still see the really rough shapes of the prototype model, like cut. It's really, and also the texturing is really sloppy. So we don't have like any engravings here. And if we look at this, then we suddenly have smoother and nice shaded edges. We have like patterns here, little details. This is a little crown.
I mean, it's crazy how much detail there is in the gun that you don't see. Like, you would never see this if you didn't see this up close.
Yes. But of course, we also plan ahead. And ideally, what we would like to have at one point is not having, for example, those static images in the shop, But basically an option where when you buy a gun, you can even flip the model around, just like with the hunter selection that we added, or that will also come, where basically can rotate the hunter model, where you can zoom in. So we just want to celebrate the weapons and the detail that we have.
Yes.
And yeah. So, but yeah, you're right. And there are details there that are barely visible sometimes in actual gameplay. True. Yeah. So, what? Oh shit. So, what else? Okay. Then the texturing process, because I wanted to dive a bit into this, because this is again a shaded version of the Mosin Nagant final model that you have in game, and as you can see, we don't have textures. The shading is awkward, and when we with the normal map we capture basically, and the high poly, we capture the shading of the high poly model, and that basically then looks like this here, where suddenly the shading switches from weird to okay. We have nice highlights on the edges, and all the shapes read much better and read well. In order to get more textures onto the weapon, I will switch to a different application, which is called Substance Painter. Just opening this up. And that is our main application where we texture our weapons. So we apply different materials like brass, metal, wood, and also of course mud and whatever fits the weapon to create the look that make the weapons of Hunt Showdown as unique as they are, I think. And this is like really one of the most important stages in the whole gun process, because without proper material definition, you're missing quite a lot of appeal to the weapons.
Also, don't worry, when there's a question not answered, we are still answering everything at the end for the Q&A.
All right. So yeah, this is the application where we basically create our textures. So again, we have...
Hug the 3D team for accuracy.
What?
Someone tells me to hug you for accuracy.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so this is a bit slow because we have like so much stuff in the scene going on and so many textures.
Loading.
I don't want to make it crash, so I have to like...
Well, this is not the engine. This is a substance.
This is not the
painter.
engine, right?
The engine would be obviously CryEngine.
So now we have things loaded up. So here you can basically get really close.
Yeah.
So how I set this up here. So I tend to, like, our weapons consist of different parts. I mentioned this before. And I have to match all these parts from the texture. So because like I have the barrel, I have the main part, and they need to match up. The wood needs to be the same. I have them all in the same scene here, and I can even like this separate them from each other. So basically we can focus on a certain part, like this. Yeah. And this is basically the main part of the gun. So the receiver, as we call it. Mm-hmm. Here we don't separate the stock from the receiver for this weapon, for example. That's a conscious design decision here. Because this big wooden part is just a continuous thing,
as a whole, yeah.
And we don't want to like cut it open because that would be kind of inaccurate. And we also have the weapon exploded, I call it, like basically set apart here, so you can here see all the different parts of our gun.
So many.
And to be accurate, we don't even model all the parts that the gun consists of. So this is like only a fraction of the actual parts this gun has. And the main reason for it is we don't want to model like little tiny details that are somewhere hidden inside the receiver that really no one will ever see.
Yeah, exactly.
So we rather focus on the parts that are part of the action, part of the reload mechanisms that you actually see moving, and focus on those ones. But yeah, here you can, for example, see the really complex bolt of the Mosin Nagant, which took quite some time to do, because that's a complex piece of metal equipment. And yeah, so how do we texture this here? So we can, we have a layer stack comparable to Photoshop. So if you guys have ever used Photoshop, you know that there are layers and you can paint on each layer and add certain things to it. So if you, for example, create a little layer here.
I have your questions written
right.
down, American Pool Guy. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, just go ahead with the question. So he was.
Oh, yeah, no. Well,
Okay.
I mean, I can ask one now if you want. Where did the design team get their inspiration for the weapon textures? Going to museums to see overlaying, oxidizing weapons and materials and such, or like how did you get that inspiration?
We visit museums usually in our free time. So, for example, our game designer Dennis, in his last vacation, he was also visiting some kind of war museum somewhere. I don't know, and he brought like thousands of images back. So,
that's really good. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, and we basically look at those, and sometimes we say, okay, yeah, this is cool, we could use that. And of course, we're reading up on historical details about the time era. And as you guys probably know, the 1890s were a time where many advancements in weaponry were created, like smokeless powder, different reload mechanisms, firing mechanisms. And reading up on that, of course, gives us ideas.
Yeah.
And yeah, just watching Forgotten Weapons as a YouTube channel is always good to discover things that barely anyone knows about.
I feel like the internet can explain you literally anything that you need to know or like learn. Like I think you can learn anything on YouTube. Literally anything. You want to change your sink or fix your sink, you can YouTube that. I did that.
That's true. Yeah, I do this all the time, like with weapons in general, like but also like
Do we have
for
the Mosin
for the life hack
ammo
things.
anywhere here? Because someone wanted a quick zoom in.
Okay, so
A quick zoom in of the Mosin long ammo.
so here we go. So we have two types of ammunition for the Mosin Nagant, which is one of the piercing bullet that is like a copper bullet that is like has a pointy end and is basically penetrating through walls or something. And we have a lead bullet that is round at the front, which is less powerful or has less penetration abilities. And yeah, that's what we have here. So we have some little stamp engravings on the back. Centerfire bullet. Yeah, that's it. And these bullets are sitting, in case of the Mosin Nagant rifle, they are sitting right down, pointing with my finger again, right in here. So they are pushed upwards in the magazine with this kind of slider. And but actually they are not sitting completely in this magazine, these 5 bullets in our game, because we don't want to waste resources with 5 bullets sitting in here. That would be wasteful. So we kind of simulate this bullet handling.
Do we have weapons with rimfire cartridges? No, right?
We have rimfire cartridges. Yes.
I mean, I don't exactly know what they are.
So the difference is, just to like a little education here. So the rimfire cartridge is basically when the hammer strikes not the center like here, but strikes the rim. So there are like different bullets. And for example, the Caldwell conversion pistol is a rimfire bullet.
Okay. So the Caldwell, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, texturing. Let me quickly just, for example, get a material done. Let's do brass. I mean, this is not fitting for the Mosin Nagant rifle, but anyway. So we can just add a brass material here. And suddenly that's to be thrown all over the model, which looks kind of weird. But we can then, for example, create masks for this brass material. Mask with color selection. Pick color. And now we have like this little, we have, pick color.
What was the most frustrating part about modeling the Mosin?
The most frustrating part, yeah, I can go into detail with this. The most frustrating part on the Mosin Nagant is actually like this part here. Like the main challenge, I think, for weapons like this, where the bolt is exposed to the viewer, is actually that this bolt kind of interacts with the receiver part, like these clamps up here. So the main thing is, when you research a weapon, you know. Okay, the bullets, you have accurate measurements for the bullets, you have accurate measurements for the barrel length usually, and you have kind of accurate measurements for the overall length. Although the overall length, which is the length from here to the barrel, I can just like show you here, like this is the overall length. That can differ already, because sometimes stocks are kind of modified to the shooter maybe, But what I usually do is I focus on the size of the bullet, which I have accurate measurements from, and the size of the barrel length. And from there, I basically can eyeball and judge how big the bolt has to be, how big the other parts has to appear. And that usually comes down to studying photos, because you won't find, or it's really, really hard to find measurements for this bolt on this area here is that many centimeters thick or something. That's a measurement you won't find. So you have to kind of eyeball this. And the challenge is, if, for example, I study my photos and I look at this bolt now and I think, oh, this bolt is a bit too thin maybe, so I have to make it wider. As soon as I make it wider, the interaction between the receiver parts here is, of course, it requires those receiver parts to be a bit wider as well. And then again, these parts might suddenly look unfitting compared to the photo reference. So with those exposed bolts, it's always like a kind of a bit of back and forth, because you try to match what you see on the references, have to pay close attention and look really close. And it's much easier, for example, when you have a weapon that is completely covered, right? Like, for example, the Vetterli rifle. There you see part of the bolt, but the bolt is actually quite covered. So you can say, it's not that important if the bolt is, let's say, 2-4 millimeters wrong in its diameter, because you can kind of cheat a bit, which the gun nuts in the chat right now will think like, oh, how can you cheat? This needs to be accurate. But yeah, I mean,
blasphemy.
Yeah.
So, just a question in between. Someone is wondering, like, where do we get those textures? Do you just buy them, or can you make your own textures? Like, do people on our team do that?
So maybe I can just show this on the slides, because doing this in this scene is a bit slow, because the scene is like a bit big, but I can show the texturing process and explain a tiny bit. So when we do the wood textures, for example, the first thing we do when texturing is we add additional detail. Like, this is what we get when we bake down our high poly to the low poly. Yeah. Okay. Now we have the sculpting pass, I call it, or stamping pass. And here I basically add material details like chipping and denting of the wood. We add engravings of the weapon, like markings, whatever. And when this is done, we then continue with the different material passes. And here we have a photo-sourced wood texture, a base wood texture that is a bright wood that you actually don't want on the weapon. But we then take this wood texture.
Is stamping done in ZBrush?
No, it's completely done in Substance Painter.
Okay.
For our very first weapons that we did, like the the Winfield rifle. How dare me saying
Winchester.
For the Winfield rifle, for example, and the Caldwell conversion pistol, these were our first benchmark guns. There we actually did ZBrush passes on them, because we didn't have the Substance Painter pipeline that developed. And that takes many resources away, because these models need to be subdivided, and yeah. So we try to avoid this now, because Substance Painter is quicker. Okay, photo texture, wood. And we then basically bring this texture with certain filters and gradient maps in Substance Painter.
So it really is like Photoshop.
It is like Photoshop, kind of. We bring us to the right color, to the right tone. So we already have, that's the wood tone that we want for the Mosin. We already have some little scratches here and there. Then we have another layer of varnish that we add. So the wood gets a bit darker and much more shinier.
Yeah.
Then we add some wear to the varnish, so we now have little. We can zoom in, of course. Wow, a bit blue. Yeah, and so we have like little scratches, some markings of usage.
Like rubbing.
Exactly, and so to answer the question, this texture is photo sourced. We also have substances that we create in Substance Designer. These are for the most part done by me, but also like some other team members created substances, and there we have, for example, also procedural wood that we can use, and we just use whatever wood we think fits best to the weapon.
Yeah, no, I'm actually, because like I Photoshop myself a lot. Like, this seems so fun. Like, I want to try this.
Okay. Now moving on, then we have some grease that is added to the crevices of the gun. Yeah. So to make it a bit more huntified. And now we go into the metal parts. So we have
metal gets like upgraded like quick in one go. Like that's
yeah, that is, for example, that's a substance that we have.
Okay.
So that is one of the metal substance that I did. So it's basically comes down to slap it on there and you're kind of ready to go. But we refine this a bit more. So from this base metal, we basically add a darker and more blued metal to the main receiver parts, like here. So suddenly, basically, this appears much more, closer to our references than actually than before. Then we have a different metal for the a pure metal for the bolt. That is also a decision to basically have certain parts sticking out a bit more. So it also comes down to readability, right? So sometimes an historical and accurate weapon looks nice when viewed up from close in the photos that we got from the gun auctions or something.
Yeah.
But when viewed in the game, suddenly it doesn't read. There are details all over the place. And for example, so then we decide, okay, certain parts might need to be a bit pushed. So deciding, okay, we make this part pure metal just for the sake of readability. That's something we also do to just give a better look in the game. Yeah, to this pure metal there also comes a dirt pass like this, with some masks, some procedural effects, and then some little scratches. And that is actually the final texture. And of course, what we are here missing right now is the mud textures and the mud pass. And that is something that is done with a special shader effect in the engine. That is something we don't do on the regular textures of the weapon, because we want the mud to be a flexible effect that we add to the weapons. So we theoretically could also have those clean weapons, for example, in a shop environment where you would buy them in a clean way, and only have the muddied and dirty versions, for example, in the actual game. So therefore we have this process.
Sorry, someone asked, what size are the textures in the game, 2K or 4K?
So a whole weapon is basically usually using as a total 4K textures. But of course we split this apart. So for example, the Mosin Nagant rifle comes with 4K. I have to check. I don't know. We can look here. So it should say.
Will you guys consider adding textures to change between different guns of the same model? Different guns.
Wait, I have to think about this. Where is it?
From different games for the same model.
I don't get it.
Kind of confused. Like, I feel like what he's trying to say, like, would we have the same texture of a different type of gun on another gun?
Yeah, then this is not possible per se, because you have to see that, for example, this UV layout that we talked about earlier. So I can show this for the Mosin Nagant rifle quickly. Like, this is the UV layout for the Mosin Nagant.
Oh,
this
is like skins. Okay.
Skins. Okay. So what we theoretically could do is use this wood texture or this wood setup here that we have, and make a custom, use this one and put it on the Nagant revolver, for example, if we wanted to. Would it look a bit different though?
In a sense, this could be a cool poster, like, or a cool Instagram post. I just like, it kind of looks like I don't know, an advertisement.
All right. Yeah, but actually we could do that and propagate this like a wood texture to another weapon. But we couldn't just like take this texture and throw it onto another weapon and it would work right off the bat. That's not how this thing actually works. Where was it? Ah, yeah, the texture sizes. So the receiver of the Mosin Nagant rifle is in game 4K by 2K, and then we have the barrel, which is also I think 4K by 1K. No, it's also 4K by 2K.
Yeah. So
that adds up to 4K pictures.
Did you use Substance Designer? I mean Substance Painter, right? We use that for dirt.
Yes, kind of. So for example, for this mud effects that so the dirt, of course, we have like little subtle dirt right here. These little things. Wait, it's where are my layers? Here. For the mud effects in the engine, we basically create a blend mask in the engine, in the game. Just getting it. Okay, we are on the barrel. Doesn't matter. Okay, this. So, this is looks weird, but this is the blend mask for the mud in the game. So the mod effects that you see in the game, the blend masks for this are created here. So everything that's white will have mod effects in the game on it, and everything that's black will have no mod effects. And we basically author these blend masks in Substance Painter as well. And unfortunately, there's no real good way to preview them here. So what we can do is, I can enable this a bit. Maybe it works. But usually it doesn't read as cool as it looks in the game.
Some technical questions for you after we do the Q&A. Also, just to answer, because like I saw someone ask like, will we get skins? Like, if we do get skins, like probably like further down the line for sure. But like they will always be more accurate, so it would not be a crazy skin that's like, for example, pink. I mean, easy example, but they will still fit the game. But it won't be like, I'm gonna run around with the pink hunter right now.
Yeah, so we are thinking and experimenting about with skins. So what we can do, of course, the weapons are set up in a way to allow skin modifications, and that's also an easy variation to do. There are discussions happening, okay, should everything have impacts on gameplay, for example? So not talking about skins, but in general, for example, legendary weapons is also a thing that we are exploring. So how do we use, for example, the aspect of skins for maybe legendary weapons? What aspects are reserved for legendary weapons? And for example, legendary weapons would be ideally have impact on the gameplay as well.
Yeah.
While if we're talking about skins only, that would be just a cosmetic variation. And we are not completely decided on this matter. But what was the question again?
I'm forgetting skins.
Yeah, at one point, ideally, we would be nice to have skins. I just can't confirm it right now because there are still discussions going on about it.
Yeah.
But,
and also for crafting, that's also something that we're still figuring out, like how we exactly want to do crafting. At the moment, we are mainly focusing for like the shorter term on community requested features, and obviously we're working hard on the map, which we'll get more information like later. But know that we're thinking about it because like crafting is such an interesting thing and like a big thing, so we want to make sure that it's obviously that it works and that it gives people the wishes that they have. Obviously we're hard thinking what we should do exactly with how the crafting will work in our game.
Yeah.
So
I think especially the thing is right now everyone is used to using the shop. So basically you unlock a weapon in the bloodline and then you can just buy it. So if suddenly, for example, we change the crafting and you have to acquire materials or like certain things in the world as you play, and suddenly the game meta changes where you're missing resources all the time, then of course you have unlocked things but you can't buy them, so that makes things even more complicated, for example, than just being missing some money, right? So there needs to go quite some balancing into this.
Yeah, exactly. So the crafting is something that we want to do right rather than give you guys crafting and crazy, but it is something that we are actively thinking about and how we're going to do it. But yeah, in the meantime, we're focusing on the community requests that you guys have been giving us, so no worries.
Yeah. So here I set up the little mod effects thing. So just to preview this, like we create this in the game as well. This is like kind of mimicking the effects we have in the engine.
So this is probably related also later to dynamic dirt, because I know that we had a question earlier if we're going to get dynamic dirt in the game.
Yeah. So basically when that was back in 2015 where we decided the weapons need to be in line with our world, with the Louisiana swamp where the game actually takes place. And how we planned out the dirt was basically that we could have this dynamically. The main thing is that we want this not only to be a visual feature, ideally, because only adding a visual thing is nice, looks cool, but it's not what the game mainly needs right now. I mean, visually, I think we are on the good side. And what we don't need is more stuff that puts pressure on performance. But for example, if at one point this also could have like gameplay implications, so for example, taking care of your weapon during the mission in terms of maybe, I mean, these were
yeah.
thought experiments where basically you say, okay, you are engaging into melee combat, your weapon gets dirty, gets maybe bloody. You basically go into water, and suddenly the
dirt comes
dirt
out. Yeah.
comes out, for example, and having this maybe tied to certain aspects of maybe you have a failure when you shoot or something. But of course, this is like really dangerous to introduce such things, because it can like a jamming weapon can be like really bad in the game, because suddenly you miss that one shot, right?
I think we've also talked about this with Dennis about the weapon jamming, like in one of our first developer live streams. Like, people would get very frustrated when, I mean, like, even now, like, very rarely it sometimes still happens that sometimes shoots and they feel that they didn't hit. So imagine if that would actually be a feature of the game. I don't know if people will really enjoy that. So yeah. No.
I think in the end it comes down to having, like, I mean, putting the resources where they are needed, and right now there are many more things than, I mean, I would be happy to just have this like dynamic dirt thing in the game just for the visuals of it. I mean, I'm an artist, so
we'd like,
of course, but yeah, the game, I think right now the resources are spent better on different features to get them right.
Exactly, and better performance.
Yeah, you
all love performance.
Mud barrels, I think like we have covered this year. We can go in and paint something up, but yeah, I think the concept of getting the textures here should be quite clear. I mean, this is like a really complex thing. So, for example, the whole process of texturing this weapon also takes 3 days. So it's like not just throwing it on there and be done with it.
Yeah.
So we have procedural materials. We also have masks that we can control. For example, the amount of dirt. So we have. Let me go over this.
Someone asked, why does the Winfield aperture exist? Is it like a messages? How to pronounce this word? My word, because I don't think he's trying to work it. It's not messages. Is it messages? Why does it look?
Where is it from? From who?
From Captain Coward. He says, why does the Winfield aperture?
Okay. Well, one of the reasons why we did this was, of course,
masochist. That's it. Yeah.
So we had the peephole sights, right? And peephole sights were quite common in the era. And we thought that would be a cool thing to actually have peephole sights in the game. Mm-hmm. So we experimented with it on the Nitro Express rifle. Yeah. And everyone thought and was under the impression that's a cool thing. They provide you some zooming. And so it's easier to land accurate shots, but they also kind of obstructing in the view, and that really helps, for example, to balance the nitro a bit. So you basically are not have such an easy time basically.
But then people are wondering why with the Winfield, because like the Winfield is like one of our basic weapons. Why do you have a harder time on the Winfield?
Well, we thought basically having something in between that is accessible earlier than, for example, the scopes maybe, and not as expensive as, for example, this medium scoped Winfield that we offer.
Yeah.
Something like that. But of course, if people think like this is really not useful, it is not good enough, it doesn't compete, we will take a look at it, and maybe we have to change something. Maybe at one point we just remove the peephole from the Winfield because it just doesn't fit the Winfield. We could, for example, use that peephole sight on other weapons, or we decide maybe the peephole is not working at all for regular weapons, and we might remove it completely. That's also a possibility. Or we tweak it in a certain way that maybe it gets a tiny bit more zoom, and suddenly these like headshots and or more accurate shots with a non-scoped Winfield are more feasible. That are possible solutions to it.
All right.
That we have to investigate.
Okay, let us continue.
All right. I wanted to. Come on. I wanted to show mask and little. Whatever.
I already have a similar question, Thomas, and at the end of the like when we're showing off stuff, we're gonna move to the Q&A.
All right. So I would say we just continue because we are running out of time a bit, I guess.
Well, I mean, we're not running out of time. We can go on
forever.
As long as you have time.
Okay. So I'm running out of time at one point, but anyway. maybe I just continue because like we have the texturing covered, and what we also have is teasing a few new weapons or one new weapon that is to be added to the game soonish.
Hey, what is that? What do I see here? A bomb lance?
That's the bomb lance. A few of you who were really into the dev streams might have seen it already. So in one of the dev streams, you could see me working on it. So we have this model laying around for quite some time. So this is basically a two-handed melee weapon where you can do large slashes with a huge blade at the front, hit many zombies at the same time, for example. And you have a really powerful secondary attack that will basically do a thrust step attack. And upon creating this step, you will also release this harpoon projectile from the weapon that is filled with a dynamite stick.
Very nice.
So the whole design aspect of it is for high priority threats, like if you encounter a meathead, or if you manage to get into the boss pit and you're fighting with a butcher, you're fighting with a spider, you can have this one chance of firing that harpoon projectile and kind of insta-kill this like super powerful monster. It's a weapon, I think, that will you will sacrifice, of course, a two-handed slot for it. So it's a real investment, right? But it will lead to really different gameplay, I think. And that will be added to the game at some point.
We can give a date, but it's a teaser.
Yeah. So to go into some detail about this, like the idea for this weapon came from our art director Magnus. So we wanted something to stab someone with and blow him up. So something like a harpoon thing that explodes. And we designed this weapon. The first designs of this weapon were done in 2015, and back then our game was PvE only. So we didn't have the PvP mode. And the whole concept of the weapon evolved around something to kill big monsters. So the lower concept, for example, that was drawn by me. These were really early concepts that were not in line of what we wanted to go after. So they were kind of scrapped. So we kind of experiment with things. And sometimes they don't work out and we just leave them. Then another concept artist, Timur, basically provided us with the second concept. And that was iterated even further on by Peter Sutherland, who provided the above concept, which would be the final one that we also modeled. And the aspect of this weapon being designed as a PvE weapon, that is the reason why we still have to take some time to balance it, because right now suddenly you could use that against players. And we want, of course, the experience when you use, for example, especially the second fire mode with the harpoon and the dynamite. We also want this to play well against other players, and so they don't feel kind of cheated, so they know what's actually happening. And we have to test this a bit. So there are some ideas. Maybe certain aspects of the weapon might change, not the model so much, but rather how the weapon works. Right, exactly. But yeah. That should basically bring some more variation into the game. Oh, and here's another thing. These are for example, another prototype models that we did back then in 2015, different variations.
The top left looks more like a harpoon, actually.
Exactly, yeah. That was the concept here. And then we had more spear kind of weapons. And these were all scrapped. But anyway, yeah. And this is basically what we now ended up with. And yeah. Looking forward to having this in the game, actually.
Yeah, just gonna write that down because I would love a melee only event, or everyone just has to go melee.
So yeah, any more questions? Because you wrote down.
Yeah. So we have quite a lot of questions. That means we're gonna go to Q&A. Let me first go through some questions. So guys, hold your horses. Hold your horses. We're gonna get to some new other questions first. So one person said, why not add in all of the ideas you have for the different stocks so we can customize our guns and make them more personal?
Our design decision is that basically adding a different stock to a gun has gameplay implications. So for example, adding the buttstock to the Nagant rifle, to the Nagant pistol, basically reduces the sway and iron sight. and so that has gameplay implications. If, for example, I think the question is here, why not having the concepted stocks available and you can just pick one that you like? That is something that we actually could do, because then it again comes down to visual and cosmetic differences. But it's of course like much work, because we have to create then 5 stocks and to provide this visual variance. And for example, talking about the stocks, for example, these are things that you can barely see in the game when you play the game. And at the moment, we also have, we're also missing, one could say, those bragging right aspects, right? If I win the game, nobody sees my hunter, nobody sees my weapon. So
I mean, we're going to get the partner inspector
we get it, but when we have that, then I think these things will get more important, and then they make more sense. Right now, it is cool for you to equip this, but it's less cool because you can't share it with other people, and we actually would like to have this at one point. But that would be cool, but also quite intense on the content side.
Okay, how long does it take to render the high quality of a render?
So of these renderings, of these 2D renderings, I guess.
I'm not sure, because this was asked in the beginning, so I assume it was of the model, of the 3D model.
Okay.
Was asked by Timmy Castags.
So when it comes to like these renders, maybe I asked the question both ways. When it comes to these renders, these are just taken straight from the engine. So there's no much rendering going on. This is all real time. And when it comes down to getting this like nice shaded high poly model, I think that was answered in between. That comes down to complexity. So for example, for the Nagant rifle, it's like 1 week. For this bomb lance, for example, that took much longer. So we're talking about 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, for example. That also comes down to, do we do a ZBrush pass, for example?
Okay. Any chance of a revolver with a breakout cylinder?
Yes. Sure. So breakout. So we. I mean, there are different cylinders. So we can have a break action revolver going on, where you basically flip it out to the top, or you have a side opening revolver. We're experimenting and basically like I have talked about different revolver designs that evolve around these. We are working on things there. Not saying anything else because we can't narrow down when this will be, but there will be different reload mechanics happening for revolvers at one point. Yeah.
Okay. How many polygons does a Winchester have? Oh, well, the Winfield, not the Winchester, deadly spider. But I think, I mean, it depends what model, because obviously...
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about the regular, the super base model without the fancy stuff, we're talking about roughly 9,000 polygons. 10,000 maybe. And of course, if you add up the blade stock, if you add up the scope, and these can basically increase the poly count.
Yeah. Is it manual LOD making, or is it automated by a script or in CryEngine?
It's a combination of both. So we have in CryEngine, we have a LOD creation tool that helps us to create LODs, but we are not using it for the weapons. So for the LOD1, we basically do this by hand, because the main reason is the LOD1 switches so early that we want to have perfect shading on the weapon. So we don't want to sacrifice visual quality.
Yeah.
So we really go in and make a really conscious decision of which details can go away, which details need to stay. Because you have to imagine, if I remove a certain edge, the shading changes. And sometimes removing the wrong edge on a model, the wrong polygon, will kill and disrupt the shading intensively. And so we do this by hand. The other LODs, LOD2, 3, and 4, the further away they are, the more we are using scripts and Pro Optimize, for example, to just get the poly count down, because then shading and the general quality doesn't matter as much.
Yeah. Just to explain a little bit, because we can't really give that many answers on more of the game design questions, rather than it's mainly the more of the art of it, rather than how things works, like reworking the Mosin, if for example the aftermath or whatever. That's not something we would answer questions about. That is for another time, kids. Does the same model technique apply to all structures in Hunt? Like, are the objects rendered 4 times for different distances? So, like, what he just explained earlier with the way how our weapons work is that you have a shittier model, pretty much. A less detailed model when you're like far away from that person, so you cannot properly see it anyways, so there's no need to have a high poly. But like, do we do that with more things in Hunt?
Yes, everything has these things.
Everything.
So every tree, even grass, has these optimizations going on, because otherwise this like high fidelity world of Hunt Showdown wouldn't be possible with the frame rate that we have right now. And we're still continuing on improving things. Of course, the performance improvement, for example, now happens on more of the technical side of things. So we're not going in and saying, okay, everyone needs to cut 500 polygons from each mesh, because that's not how it works. Because the time, the frames that you would get out of that would be absolutely minimal.
Then is that all based of like where you are compared to other people, or like from like distance? Because like obviously it has to be calculated for every person individually.
The thing is, like with those LOD meshes, it is calculated on your client. So, for example, if you're standing somewhere and in a distance 50 meters away there's a house, then the modules of that house will have their LODs, and they will basically have less details compared to when you're really close.
Yeah.
And same with the trees, for example. Individual leaves will not be there anymore. Sometimes things are combined. So, for example, when you're really up close, you have like many branches, many different leaves, and this will be then reduced onto larger planes, so you barely can see the difference at a distance.
Yeah.
And that is basically calculated on the client for each client separately.
Then a personal question: are there any plans for any Dolch variants? Like a silent? No, I don't know. Like
a silent with a long scope and a bayonet. No. So I think the Dolch is always a topic that we come back to, because of course it's very powerful and a great weapon. But of course, what we want with the pistols, we want to have more variety on the pistol side of things, because we think we have many rifles, but not so many pistols to pick from.
Yeah, exactly.
And we, especially in the mid game, I think we lack some variety there. So instead of like adding more stuff to this kind of high level gun, we will rather see more revolvers and more pistols coming in at one point. So in the midterm, people have more to pick from, and if we have accomplished that, then we can think about maybe adding variations to the Mauser. By the way, the Mauser, we talked about the representative aspect. The Mauser at the moment is also a representative weapon. So if we add variations to the Mauser at one point, you can expect this to be brought to final quality.
So, one about the Mosin, how many sets of textures and what resolution? So, like, we know that it's 4K. How many textures are used for the Mosin?
So, for the barrel, we have one texture set, and for the stock, we have, and the receiver, we have one texture set, both 4K by 2K. Each texture set consists of a diffuse texture, a specular texture, and a normal map. In the alpha channel of the normal map, there's the gloss map, which is basically controlling the sharpness of the highlights. And that's it. So we have another texture set for the ammo, because we have ammo types, and so we have to basically be able to switch this out. And yeah, I think that's it. But then of course we have the scope, which is shared across different weapons, and that's again a separate one. And
okay, this one we already answered. That one is not really for us. Where did the design get their inspiration one from web? Oh no, we have actually answered. We got inspiration, but it's like a bunch of things. Anyone else, if you guys watch Forgotten Weapons, you must have seen a really cool folding shotgun, right? When can we see that in the game? I don't know if you've seen Forgotten Weapons.
Well, the thing is, I watch Forgotten Weapons every once in a while. The thing is, like, they have so many videos coming out. I'm not watching every video that they're putting out. And of course, watching Forgotten Weapons videos is also like really distracting, because like you can't model weapons while watching Forgotten Weapons videos. So it's like it comes down to when I have time. So actually, I don't know the folding shotgun that you're talking about right now. So we haven't taken a look at it. So probably, so for now, no.
Okay. Do your in-game weapons take into consideration black versus smokeless power in terms of weapon performance? I personally don't understand the question. Maybe you do.
Yeah, so the difference between black and smokeless powder is the black powder created
That's
a
more
much
animation then,
bigger
right?
smoke, for example, when fired. So it was obstructing the battlefield, and the pressure inside the barrel and inside the gun was much lower. So the projectile speed was considerably lower than with smokeless powder. This advancement was made in the 1890s somewhere, and no, we don't model this difference. Because also when we tried the effects when shooting, like for example the smoke that comes out of a barrel, having like really bright and intense like smoke coming out, that's like really obstructing. And if we would model that, I think certain types of guns would be even more unforgiving, because you would give away your position and at the same time take your ability to see away. And I think that would be a complexity that, I don't know, would make it even more harder, because you would probably like smokeless guns would be something for the starters, for newcomers, because it's inferior in every way. And not sorry, I mean not smokeless, but black powder. And giving the newcomers an even more underwhelming kind of equipment or abilities would be not so good at the current state of the game.
Gotcha. Me and my friend were talking about the potential of a lever action shotgun, like the Winchester model 1887.
That's interesting. I think the thing is, if you compare the current shotguns that we have, like with the Spencer shotgun as a pump action shotgun, the Spectre, sorry, and the Crown and King shotgun, at least the Crown and King shotgun being kind of the pinnacle of shotgun design, we are having quite some power there already, so you can dish out so much damage with this weapon. And I think a lever action shotgun would be not the same thing, of course, but more in that ballpark. So I think it comes down to if we really see the need for this, and that is again something that the designers have to answer, because usually, like me as the artist, I like, of course, a lever action shotgun.
Yeah.
Bring it on! I'm here. I will model this, but the designers basically know, okay, the weapon cast is really missing this, and so that would be something for another stream. But right now we have not plans for adding a Winchester lever action shotgun.
Okay. What is an estimation of full design time it takes to create a fully designed firearm to the game?
Okay, so if we measure everyone who's involved, so you have to say like this is like the designers, the animators, tech art, myself, then even testing, putting it out there. I think you had to measure like 1 month. I think like basically, because like some of these steps can be taken in parallel, and some of these steps can't be taken in parallel. So
and obviously it takes, like, how long does it take to make a completely new weapon compared to one that's a variation?
Yeah, exactly. So for example, if we create a revolver that is using that it can look different to the Nagant revolver, for example, but it's using the same kind of mechanics of reloading, like a loading gate and stuff like that, then it's easier. But for example, if we suddenly would create a swing out revolver with a swing out cylinder, there would be far more work, because just a different reload mechanic. So that's also a factor.
Makes sense. Is there an additional? If there are additional locations added later on, perhaps Texas oil fields, will weapons get more textures to reflect the environment?
With the environment, so for example, if at one point we had, for example, a snow environment or whatever, then with the dirt system that we have, we could easily bring this into another set, basically. Or if we had a dusty environment like desert, then we could also do that and not having the mud there. That's possible. So we of course will try to match this. When it comes to Texas oil fields and basically maps, other maps and themes to be added, we're focusing on our second map for now. And yeah, we will. You will be surprised what it is when it's coming out. And yeah.
Gotcha. Why did you guys choose to go for the Federally carbine instead of the full-length rifle? If you know. Obviously, if you don't know, then you can't answer.
Let me think. So, we decided to have the Federally because it's a not as popular rifle, so not so many people know it, and it's a really nice looking gun. Also, specifically for the carbine version of this and the carbine size, yeah, I think Dennis has to answer this.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, keep that question, Grunix, for next time when we have a stream again with Dennis at some point. And then we'll try our best to answer. Last question. How much vertex painting do you use, I think, for the guns compared to other assets?
So for the guns, we don't use any vertex painting at all. The main reason for that is compared to regular environment assets like a wall or something, there we use vertex painting. So we paint in the vertex alpha channel a grayscale map, and that basically blends two different textures. That works well because for for the wall you usually have a regular spaced amount of polygons on the wall. On weapons you don't have this. Like for example, if you follow my cursor. On this gun, for example, we could have like here is a vertex, and the next vertex maybe is down here, because in this area we only need like a long edge here. We don't need more detail on this surface. So therefore, as we have areas that are high density detail in terms of vertices, and other areas that have like less vertex detail, the vertex painting is not as useful because the blending just doesn't work as well. So we control the whole blending only by this black and white masks that we paint unique for each weapon.
Gotcha. Okay, so that was it for today. Thank you guys so much, and thank you, Alexander, for explaining everything, because there are definitely things that I didn't know, and also like I kind of want to like texture a gun now. But I know a lot of you guys have a lot of questions that we haven't answered or that are not related to this topic, because unfortunately he is just a specialist in his own work. Same for me. We can't answer all the questions because we don't have the answers. So will be doing more dev streams obviously next week Thursday again, where we'll get into detail with, I don't know what topic we're gonna have yet, but we'll announce it. And definitely you can always join our Discord, which is discord.gg/HunShowdown, and ask your questions there, or maybe on our social media channels if you're there on Twitter or on Facebook /HunShowdown. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. We hope you have a lovely rest of your Thursday, and until next time.
Thank you. Bye bye.